Humans have this interesting capacity to share a sense of synchronized brain activity that sort of creates this sense of shared experience. Our ability to remain present and to mindfully participate in and make good use of that very human feature, that's becoming more difficult as we separate ourselves from the human interaction to question what's going on in the background. If an AI tool or if other processes are constantly running in the background, it can compromise the way that we are present in the moment.
Welcome to Magic in the Moment, Mindfulness in Real Time. My name is Clayton Platt, and I'll be your host for this podcast journey. And for many people, practicing mindfulness has very little to do with sitting on a cushion, lighting incense, or even focusing on their breath. Just paying attention to what they're doing at any moment and doing this intentionally can create that same magic. Our time together is intended to share how mindfulness plays out in everyday life for our guests. And before we begin, here's a word from our sponsor, Meditation for Leadership. We all feel it, the pressure to keep up, to perform, to push through. But lasting success doesn't come from speeding up. It comes from slowing down, leaning in, and creating the space to lead from within. That space is where we shift from autopilot to intention, building mindful habits that strengthen focus and calm. It's where we stay connected to our values and purpose, choosing to respond instead of react. It's where we unlock our potential to positively shape our own lives and empower others to grow and thrive. That's the work of Meditation for Leadership. If you're ready to create the space for sustainable success, visit meditationforleadership.org. What does it mean to be human in a world increasingly shaped by artificial intelligence? My guest today has spent her career at the intersection of neuroscience, leadership, and now that pressing question. Dr. Janine Stewart holds a PhD in behavioral neuroscience from the University of Virginia. She has served as chief behavioral scientist at the NeuroLeadership Institute and has worked with leaders in government, healthcare, and Fortune 100 organizations across the globe. Her research led her to a discovery she calls neurosynchrony, the measurable brain activity that emerges when human beings are genuinely connected to one another. And now, as AI transforms the workplace at a pace that no one fully anticipated, she's asking a question that I find both urgent and deeply resonant with everything this podcast explores. In a world where machines can process information faster than any human brain, what is the irreducible value of human presence? What does the brain do? What does connection do that no algorithm can replicate? This is a conversation about neuroscience and leadership? Yes. But at its heart, it's a conversation about what it means to be awake and present in the moments that matter most, and why that capacity may be more important now than any point in our lifetimes. Janine, welcome to Magic in the Moment.
Thanks, Clayton. I'm really delighted that we get to do this today.
I am too. And I am thrilled that we've been able to stay connected. You and I met through our mutual work with the NeuroLeadership Institute. And boy, I was very impressed with what you were doing then and still am. And I want to start with this incredibly important issue about AI and the work that you're doing with it. And we're going to go from there into lots of conversations about how mindfulness plays a role in this. But bring me up to speed with this, if you would, Janine.
Sure. We're living in such interesting times. And as AI started to make its presence known in the workplace, and for me, this goes back about three and a half years to the work that I was doing in my last corporate job. The first tool that they adopted was an AI tool that was being deployed in sales conversations and in the sales process, really just to do note taking and to capture highlights from client conversations. And right from the beginning, I could see the power in this amazing tool that could give real-time feedback on a conversation, but also the potential for that kind of tool to really reshape and reformulate the human interaction in ways that people might not have expected. And that is what's happening. We're not wired to have a non-human in the mix when we form our social groups.
Yeah. There's a lot that I've been focusing on around this issue of connection and the ability to be truly present as we interact with people. And that framework that you've just described is incredibly timely, obviously. So with these clear challenges that you're working with in your research, how does mindfulness play into that?
You've used the phrasing several times that it's more important than ever to think about how humans are present. And each of us has a role to play in any social group that we are part of, whether AI is there or not. We each have a role to play in considering how we are impacting the other humans. But AI is making that a little more complicated. And this sort of tees up that issue of neural synchrony that you touched on in the introduction. Humans have this interesting capacity to share a sense of synchronized brain activity that sort of creates this sense of shared experience. Our ability to remain present and to mindfully participate in and make good use of that very human feature, that's becoming more difficult as we separate ourselves from the human interaction to question what's going on in the background. If an AI tool or if other processes are constantly running in the background, it can compromise the way that we are present in the moment. And that can impact our ability to remain mindfully engaged in ways that really impact the group positively if we get it right.
Let's take a deeper dive with this. I'd love to explore, if you could, and I'm putting you on the spot here, so forgive me for this, but can you paint an example how that might play out in an everyday working environment?
Sure. I'm actually going to make use of or refer to an article that came out recently in Harvard Business Review. I think it was in March of 2026 of this year, that HBR had an article called AI Brain Fry, or that phrasing was featured in the title. And I love that phrasing, AI Brain Fry. The idea being that in practice, as we add AI tools into our work processes, and we'll just think about the individual experience of that. We add AI tools, and the more tools we add as they get stacked up, the more our brains are being pulled out of the moment, whatever work we're trying to do deeply internally, and we divide our attention or shift our attention to managing the workflows that AI is managing for us. So this potential for cognitive overload actually comes in after you add in more than one, and I think the number they gave was at about 3 AI tools running, the human brain starts to feel extreme cognitive stress. Now, as long as we are using one or two tools to lighten our workload or to take away some of the drudgery, we may actually be gaining cognitive capacity and the ability to be more present and to be more engaged, especially with the other humans in the mix. But as the AI tool burden, the management of these tools starts to become a bigger and bigger presence or pressure for us, that starts to degrade the human interactions as well as the productivity overall. So they've named this AI Brain Fry. And I appreciate that the world is talking about these issues because I'm just one person. I've been trying to talk about this in my own way for a couple of years. But having a more public forum or having others in the public eye talking about this is giving us a nice shared conversation, which is creating more of that synchrony around this conversation that you and I are having. So I'm grateful for that.
Yeah. So the sense that, again, within limits, if we're talking about using, as you mentioned, maybe one or two AI tools, that's somewhat manageable, and we can stay more present. And let's think about this from the brain functioning standpoint. We're able to still have our prefrontal cortex involved in the interactions and the choices we're making of what words we're using or how we're listening, right? Our awareness and all that. Okay. You mentioned, and I thought this was helpful because as someone who's become a pretty frequent AI adapter, I'm trying to be very conscious of not allowing it to take over my role as creator, but be my partner. Okay. And this may be a separate issue, and we can go deeper in that. But the sense that if we're working in a team, for example, and we've got multiple elements of AI being involved, our concentration is on managing that technical aspect as opposed to being more present and involved with the connection and the conversation or communication or whatever with our colleagues. Is that a fair way of looking at it?
Yes, exactly. So I've developed a framework that I use. I call it the Neuromighty model or framework. And Neuromighty is essentially three ways of thinking about the human brain at work. The first is what I call the inner brain, and that is, what do I think about this problem? And a lot of our conversation about weaving AI into our work is really taken from this perspective. It is, I might like doing certain things at work and I don't like doing others. Isn't it nice that I can offload those others to AI? Beautiful, done. So that internal perspective, I will have such a great time with my other work because I can offload the drudgery. The second component is what I call the outer brain. We actually have very distinctive neural networks or parts of our brain that are designed specifically to connect us with other humans. And that social connection, the way that we merge our brains with others, that's a whole different puzzle. I have a harder time as an individual thinking, what's going to happen when AI is in the mix? What's going to happen when we are holding different assumptions about the role of the AI or the way that it's contributing? What's going to happen when I'm devoting part of my attention to managing work through these bots instead of to talking to the human in front of me? All of those, that's the piece that's a lot more at risk and difficult to think through as we think about adding AI into the mix. The third part is the bridge between the two. And we can think of that as mainly being comprised of the skills and talents we think of under the umbrella of emotional intelligence, so or EQ. EQ kind of bridges that inner experience with what's going on with the group around me or the people around me. So AI can come in a helpful way at some level, but be a disruptive force at other levels.
Gotcha there. Okay. So this is reminding me, interestingly, of actually a topic that came up on a retreat that I was just at.
Nice.
And I was not expecting that. So here's what came up at the retreat. It was the discussion about, from a metta, and that's with two T's, METTA, loving kindness. From that perspective, and the element of empathy versus compassion. And the study of a long-time practicing monk with a functional MRI looking at his brain as he meditated on compassion. But the first thing they gave him was a script that was more empathic than compassion. And when he did that, the parts of his brain that you referenced that are connecting to other humans was actually not enhanced. The empathy was more observational and still actually personally related. Whereas when he actually went into a compassion meditation, where there was action involved to support the person in their suffering, the parts of the brain that were more personally relevant quieted, and the parts that were more externally and connected to other humans was activated. Now, from your standpoint as a PhD in neuroscience, does that make sense?
I'm very excited that you brought this up. And I hadn't thought of it this way, but I'm in sync with you. We're in synchrony. Metta it's so interesting. And I think your listeners are probably familiar, maybe some of them aren't, with the practice of metta. And I'd love for you to explain that further, just to make sure that people are familiar. Actually, could we start there? Can you give us an overview of what that is?
Oh, 100%. So without getting deep into the Buddhist description, but this is where it's coming from, metta is the loving kindness that one begins by typically providing a series of statements in support of themselves to a benefactor who is someone who's had a very positive impact on them, to a dear friend, to someone neutral, to someone more difficult to deal with, and then to all beings. And the phrases are typically related to elements of may you be safe, may you be happy, may you be healthy, may you live with ease. And there are many variations of those. And one is encouraged to find the appropriate phrase that resonates with what they want, but within the guidelines of we're really looking at providing safety and happiness, goodwill, and good health and ease. There's that practice of repeating those phrases to the various, we call them muses, and directing your heart space to go out to them.
I love that description. So thank you for that. I did a metta practice just as part of a meditation class just a few weeks ago. And I was saying to a friend who was asking me what I had done the day before, I said, I did this meditation class and the focus was on metta. And she said, "Ooh, metta is beautiful." I said, "Yes, and very hard." And she said, "Yes, it's very hard." It's hard because of that stepping through the set of the muses, that as you describe them, and trying to really actively think of yourself as compassionately supporting someone who may have been difficult for you to deal with. And that is very active. And this is a perfect example from my framework of inner brain versus outer brain. Outer brain is it's that compassionate, and you described it as it's an active internal process. Empathy is different. Empathy is internal. I have an image of someone. I understand what their experience is. I can think about it and relate to it without judgment, ideally, right? I can empathize. But compassion, that active component of compassion, is very much activating what I'm talking about when we talk about that outer brain or those social pathways. You're really weaving together the understanding of someone and acceptance of them as they are and offering something to them. It's active. And it's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard. And it just gets harder when you create what I call the multi-cognitive workplace. The multi-cognitive it's not just human cognition in the mix, it's machine cognition too. And that machine, as we know, that machine, as we know, can act very human. But it's not quite right, is it? It's not quite right. And so it leaves us with this intuitive sense of pulling back from it or having to reprocess. Like when I get a sycophantic response from an LLM, I have to stop and go, all right, do I want to buy that? Do I want to buy, Janine, you're so wonderful. Look at you. How creative and clever of you to put those things together. I don't want sycophancy in my workplace. I never have. I don't appreciate it. I like authenticity in my workplace. So it makes me pull back. It makes me stop whatever flow I was creating with that work. I stop and I pull back. How's that landing for you, Clayton? Is that what you expected when you asked that question?
Wow. Well, yes and no. So I expected brilliance, which you delivered. I had no idea the specifics of it. And I will take a moment just to absorb that because it's hugely powerful. And I'm going to share with you, especially because I've just been through a week of really tuning into what my body is telling me at any given moment. I'm quivering, and I'm quivering because of the relevance of that. And it's, that is cool and unexpected. So I'm thinking that sense, and by the way, I also share with you, Claude is like, Claude, you're so far up my, you're brilliant. That was wonderful. That was like, I want an honest, and we're trying to train. So when we see that stuff and we realize, oh my God, it is just a machine. It's being trained to tell me what it thinks I want to hear. There's a disconnect. And if I'm disconnected mentally, then I'm not going to be prepared to be connected mentally with humans. And then I have to, I would say okay, in this situation, and it's arising more and more, I'm going to use a mindfulness practice and try to intentionally transition from machine to human.
Yes.
And take that moment, right? And say, okay, I'm just going to breathe. And I'm going to say, thank you, Claude, for those wonderful thoughts. And now I'd like to be with Janine. And Janine, I'm going to ask you the same thing, and I want honest feedback.
There's something that I've been processing since looking at, I'll refer to that HBR article again. It's got a nice chart in it, and we can add it to the show notes if folks want to see.
Yeah.
The pressure of doing what you just described, it takes a toll. It actually is difficult. It's effortful. And it's not the same. It's not exactly the same as burnout, as just like this emotional exhaustion that many of us, maybe most of us, are familiar with at some level, of coming from just like the grind of a little bit too much work over a lengthy period of time, or a lot too much work. It's interesting to note, I work with leaders. I work with executives, typically in organizations, folks who are overseeing a team. And trying to get work done through others has just become very different and very complicated, but also it's a distinctive shift for leaders versus their people below them in the organization. So the Harvard Business Review article that I referenced on AI brain fry says it's about 14% of folks who report feeling this sense of pressure from adding too many AI tools, as we're describing. So what they're experiencing, I suspect, could be reframed as what we were talking about, this reduction in the ability to be fully present and having to constantly devote conscious energy to bringing yourself back into presence. But the numbers are very different for managers and for senior leaders. Senior leaders, it's less than 10% who are feeling that. So you're much more likely to have this experience of increasing pressure due to the addition of AI tools if you're in the trenches. And that gap in experience creates an additional layer of challenge in this moment for folks who are trying to lead, because they are going to lack empathy for what their people are experiencing. And they may even think, we just invested in these tools, and they should be, if you're doing it right, you should feel released. You should feel relief. But instead, people are quietly struggling. I think it's this challenge to our humanity in the ways that we're talking about it, and in that sense of connection with other humans, that's actually taking a toll. And people don't have the language for that yet.
This brings up for me really interesting elements of leadership skills, and knowing that, let's go pre-AI. One issue for leaders was they got promoted because they were really good at what they did. And you're so good at this, we're going to have you in charge of 10, 20, whatever number of people who are doing what you used to do. And the assumption was that you could bring some skills that you weren't doing before into this new role. And that includes a whole lot of things around awareness and self-awareness, et cetera, that when they're missing, they're big problems. Okay. We kind of knew this. We've been struggling with this, but whatever. But now we have the issue, as you said, that you have leaders who are asking their reports, either direct or skip level reports or whatever, to use tools that they're not using, and to somehow understand the pressures that it's bringing to bear for them in their daily lives. And absence of that personal experience, they need to somehow become empathic and, if possible, even compassionate, right? That element of, okay, now I not only feel what they're feeling, but now I'm going to do something about it. And lacking that, the folks in the trenches get no guidance that's meaningful to them and have to figure it out on their own. Oh, on top of doing the job, on top of adapting to using these tools that have never been known in the history of mankind. Yeah, I can see some fry happening there.
Yeah, this is hard. This is really hard. And leaders, everybody's under tremendous pressure to do more with less time. And the magical promise of AI for many organizations is AI is the magic that's going to make that all possible. But as long as we need humans in the mix, we've got to figure out how to support the humans and how to support them in remaining human. And one of the most human experiences in the workplace, one of the most beautiful and human-related experiences is flow, the concept of flow, which some of your listeners may be very familiar with, and others have experienced it even if they don't have the language. It's that experience of kind of losing yourself in something and just feeling a sense of like time falls away and it's a little hard, or it may be very hard, but you're enjoying the challenge. Time flies by, and you pick your head up again and you've achieved something and you feel pride. Like that whole experience is very distinctively human. And it requires that you be able to sink in and go with that flow. It's almost riding a wave, riding a great wave. At the moment, the ways that AI implementation is happening for a lot of organizations, it's actually disrupting that flow. And just as we started talking about the impact of AI a few minutes ago, that having to pause and say, what are my AI tools doing? Or flipping back and forth rapidly between doing high-level cognitive work and then grabbing output from an AI and saying, okay, let me weave that in. That's disruptive. You're breaking the flow every time you switch between tools. And so at the moment, for a lot of people in a lot of organizations, it's just not possible to sink in, even in the places where we maybe used to a year ago. It just isn't available to us in the same ways. So for leaders to understand and acknowledge that, and have compassion for the challenge that people are facing as they figure this out. Humans are going to take human time on a human scale to figure out how to restore their sense of enjoyment in the parts of the work they enjoy as they work to incorporate these other cognitive entities into their workflow.
Yeah. A couple of things arise for me in what you just said. And I want to see if we can deal with both of them. But first, the concept of flow is something that is when I have it, right? In a very small way, I know it on the squash court. On a slightly larger way, I know it when I'm just improvising on the piano. And it's not for anybody else, just for me, but I'm not thinking about the notes I'm playing them, right? And I think Miles Davis, which is the notes play themselves, right? So Keith Jarrett, known for his wonderful jazz improvisations, was asked about what part of his brain was active when he was playing. And they actually did functional MRIs of people improvising musically, and that the prefrontal cortex, the executive brain, was quiet. And they asked why. And he said, because if I'm thinking, I'm judging. And if I'm judging, I just stop. I can't play. So being in the zone, whether it's musical or athletic or at work, as you were mentioning, it's like there's that aspect of all the important parts of the brain are working, but they're the quiet parts of the brain. They're already know and they're being engaged, and the loud prefrontal cortex is quiet. But if we're managing the tech of AI, we have to bring that in, and that interrupts that ability to be quietly in that moment, right? So here's the other thing, though. So let's go back to our leaders, right? How can we potentially interest, I don't want to say cajole, but interest our leaders in taking a mindful approach to how they are dealing with this new landscape? How could we interest them, perhaps pique their curiosity if they're not meditators? And let's face it, most corporate leaders aren't, and that's okay. But this may be a call for some potential dipping of the toes into these waters they haven't tried before, to develop a greater sense of presence with the unknown, the unanticipated.
Okay, so much just happened in, in what you just said for me. I'm just making a note. So, first of all, the reference to improv, I think, it's so timely and it's so helpful, because this is the way in for leaders who are thinking, I have nothing. I don't know what to do here. I started down this path of creating Neuromighty, looking at the multi-cognitive workplace and creating intellectual property around this, mainly because I realized that we've been talking, the neuroscience of leadership has focused a lot on two key brain regions. The prefrontal cortex, which you just mentioned, that's the one that's activated when we are evaluating something. We're asking, is it good? We're thinking really actively about what we're doing. It's energetically costly to run it. It's right up here, by the way. It's just behind my hand if I put my hand over my forehead. This little part of our brain is surprisingly energy intensive to run. And we know when we've used it a lot because we're exhausted at the end of the day or at the end of a meeting where we've had to explain everything, or we've had to audit something or evaluate it. So that part of the brain, we know when we're using it. If we step back a bit and go actually deeper into the brain, the other part that's gotten a lot of press in the last 15, 20 years is the limbic brain, where we think about our emotional reactions. We know when we're upset, the limbic brain kind of takes over. We're not very good at evaluating things or giving a presentation when anger, frustration, anxiety are all in front. Now, as people started noticing that AI implementation projects were generating resistance among employees, the first batch of media coverage focused on the limbic brain. It said, oh, people are afraid of AI. They're afraid it's going to take their jobs. And therefore, they're not working well with it. As if it was somehow something controllable or accessible. People could decide not to be frustrated or angry. And my knowledge of the brain and leadership and workplace dynamics made me think that doesn't feel right to me. I don't think that's right. And I started researching what are the other brain areas that we might be thinking about, because it's not old-fashioned fear. And Clayton, it's back in the part of the brain that you're referring to as you talk about improv. It's what I call the intuitive brain. When the intuitive brain is running things, we have access to flow. But we also have this almost like a spidey sense that can go off when things aren't quite right. So we have access to flow, but flow can also be disrupted by things we can't name and that don't look like things that usually come up in the workplace. It doesn't look like regular frustration. It doesn't look like regular fear, anxiety, etc. It's something else. But it's the thing that makes us pause and hold back until we have just a little bit more information, feel like we've got our legs under us, and then we can go forward. I'm picturing you at the piano. I love that you are a piano player and you like to sit and improvise a bit. But if you smell something burning and you're at the piano, the first whiff of something that's maybe coming down from the kitchen is going to disrupt your playing. And then as it gets stronger or lingers, even, it doesn't have to get stronger, it can just linger. Eventually you're going to go, I'm just going to go check that. I better find out what that is. You're going to stop playing. It's not playtime. That's the way I think about a lot of the resistance that people are noting related to AI in the workplace, as people are getting used to this very different thing that in some ways looks human but isn't quite. It's way back in that intuitive brain that we are being caused to slow down. Does that make sense?
Perfectly. And I was thinking about that, being at the piano, and it's like, whether it's a smell or all of a sudden it's like I hear click, click, and it's like, oh, do I need to let my dog in? No words are needed. It's just, oh, yep, the spidey sense went off. It's, oh, I got to come back. And I'm in the present moment beautifully at what I was doing, but now I'm needed in a different spot in the present moment, and I've got to change the brain regions. Perfect sense.
So it brings that forebrain. Your prefrontal cortex has to get activated so that you can go take care of X, whatever X is, the dog, the issue in the kitchen. Maybe it's a rumble of thunder and you've got something going on outside that needs to be brought in. We're always multitasking way in the background. We're always tracking multiple things. We're always aware of our environment, even if most of our attention is present. So when we talk about being fully present, it doesn't mean that we're not aware if there's an alarm going off. It's as present as we can be given the environment and the circumstances.
Yeah. I was just thinking that a recent podcast guest was talking about climbing El Capitan. And he said, this is his present moment. And everything there is like, thunk. And yet there is the spidey sense of, wait a minute, I need to take a moment. Did I hear lightning? Whatever. Right. It's like, now it's time to say, okay, I need to get off. So that to me is, oh, that just wove it right back in. Very true. Janine, I'm incredibly fascinated by this. If I can, because you mentioned you were at a meditation class recently. Mm-hmm. What brought you personally into that practice, and how has that, in any ways that it has, worked into either your personal life and or the life you lead in this wonderful work you're doing with neuroscience?
I'm a relatively recent newcomer to meditation. And I would say my experience of meditation and mindfulness for myself really goes back to the beginning of my coach training, which is just over a decade for me. And I started where a lot of people start, which is, how do I meditate and what if I do it wrong? Right. And now when I work with clients now, I'm finding in this era that almost every client, it might not be every single conversation, but I would say just about every client I work with, the issue of mindfulness comes up, because it is so hard for people to find and keep their grounding in the world right now with all of the changes and shifts and the constant adaptation that we're dealing with. And AI has compounded that, but it's not just AI that I'm talking about. I'm just finding I have had to come along in a way that I can think more broadly about what it means to have a practice and release myself from the expectation that it's going to look a certain way or stay a certain way over time. Because for me, it has not. I've been in and out of formality, in and out of having a routine that incorporates mindfulness. And when I talk to leaders who do not meditate or do not do anything formally that fits under this umbrella, I try to give them micro practices just to start with so that they can capture that sense of that connection to what others in their environment might be thinking without stopping their own flow. So how can you weave it in? How can you give yourself just a little bit of a break? How can you think differently about the way you're managing your energy throughout the day? And I try to practice all of those things for myself as well.
That makes so much sense. And I think it would be really hard for you to notice what was needed and give workable advice if you weren't incorporating that personally. It's, to me, one of the things that I'm able to do is recognize the foibles of humanity because I am imperfect. So I can share my own missteps, but also mention that. So I have a commitment to my meditation practice, but I'm going to say that finding the ways to incorporate mindfulness in whatever way feels right and supportive to one is really important to make it as much of a habit as possible. Why? Because you don't know when you're going to need it. And the more that we have filled our quiver with the appropriate arrows on practicing it, then when we need them, we've got them. I applaud the sense of, look, if meditation feels good, do it. And there are lots of ways to do that, right? But there are other ways that you can actively, intentionally pull yourself into the moment and just be aware of, okay, I'm doing this. I've made the choice. One of my mantras right now is awareness plus choice equals results. Being aware basically necessitates being present and then saying, okay, now that I'm here, there's various things that I could do. I can make a decision to do this or this. In this moment, I should do this. But again, celebrating the multiplicity of flavors that are involved with this. And so, as you're saying, be curious, try some different things, but just know that if you're not trying, if you're not making an effort, if there's not that commitment to doing whatever it is that reinforces it, it's probably not going to be there when you need it.
I think that's beautifully said. And I also believe right now in the way the workplace has evolved, the way leadership pressures have evolved rapidly in the last couple of years, I don't believe it is possible to really thrive as a leader without figuring out how to bring mindfulness in, because you can't access that intuitive brain that we were talking about a moment ago really effectively in the flow of work unless you have some way for you personally of getting there, of activating that. That might sound, that's a lot. That might sound overwhelming to some, but But that's where I'm finding my coaching is just going there because people are needing something new. They're needing some fresh way of approaching their problems. Otherwise, they're mired in frustration over the fact that they expect and need the work to be flowing at a certain speed. And they're finding their people can't necessarily, or some can and others can't. And there's all this chaotic flow among the people running the work. So the only way to prevent yourself as a leader from not getting mired in that frustration or assume that you've got all the wrong people in all those seats is to take a step back and find a way to look with fresh eyes at the situation. And accessing that intuitive brain, as mysterious as that sounds, is where I try to go with my executive clients.
Yeah. Integrating that beginner's mind and realizing that all your presumptions, some of them may be right, some of them may be wrong, but if we can put aside our presumptions and look at it with fresh eyes, we may be very surprised by what we see.
Right.
And you also mentioned again the limbic response when things aren't going right, and whether that's again the folks in the trenches or management leadership, when the limbic system kicks in, fight or flight, and we're not seeing clearly. A couple things. One, our ability to recognize somatically, this is what's happening. I was like, oh, this ain't my first rodeo, right? I've been disrupted before. I recognize my stomach, my arms, whatever it is. And then being able to get, okay, just take a few deep breaths, get grounded, pause. And then in that moment, there's that clarity can arise. It's not guaranteed, but it's pretty much guaranteed not to happen if we've allowed the hijacking of the limbic system to occur. So once again, doesn't sound easy, but it's okay. I get that. How are you going to do it if you haven't made the commitment to practice some way of getting there? And acknowledging that this, first and foremost, acknowledging that this can and does happen. Also, and I think this is really important, when that moment is occurring and all hell seems to be breaking loose, letting go of the judgment of people that are reporting to you or yourself. So compassion plays a part externally and certainly internally. It's welcome to the human race. Things aren't going perfectly. I'm going to take a breath. Okay. So instead of beating myself up right now, which isn't helpful, I'm going to say, okay, dude, you're imperfect, but you have a way. Let's breathe. Let's get present. Now, let's check this out with curiosity. I haven't been here necessarily before. My brain is telling me I have, but each situation is new.
What's coming up for me is what I'm calling the intuitive brain. It's always been a partner for your prefrontal cortex when you're doing your best work. It's just that we haven't been talking about it in this way. And as you mentioned, for me, what is the superpower of this era? It's curiosity. Like getting value out of really practicing curiosity in the moment and kind of setting aside judgment and just saying, I really wonder what's happening here. These are good people. I know they're good people. Now I have to ask, why are they not thriving, or why are they not achieving what I believe they can achieve? Let me get curious about that. That is like a fire blanket over that limbic fire of frustration and anger or whatever else might be getting in the way. It's like your intuitive brain can come along and say, let's quiet that down so that we can be more consciously present and find a bit of problem-solving flow, even though this is hard, even though I've never seen people behave this way before. How can I approach this with curiosity and true openness and without judgment? It's new. It's not that we've never done that before, but this is bringing those kinds of practices to the fore so that we really can be at our best and get the most out of the changes that we're all adjusting to.
Yeah. Yeah. The ability today, more than ever, to admit that you may not have been given, either by birth or through training or experience, the tools to deal with what we're facing today or tomorrow is really important. It's always important, but now it's, as you've mentioned, it's coming at breakneck speed with so many implications that we never could have predicted. And if we can be honest about that, then we also can be honest about the need to make the time. If you don't have 5 minutes to meditate every day, take 10.
Mm-hmm.
Janine, I could spend weeks, and I hope at some time to spend more time. But right now I'm saying we've accomplished a lot in this conversation, a lot of which I had no idea. And I'm so thrilled we allowed the natural flow of things to take us here. You are a treasure. Your work that you're doing is so important, so timely. And obviously you have this wealth of skills that you're bringing, but also that wonderful curiosity to say, what else can I learn? What else can I do? It's timely and important and very appreciated.
Thank you so much, Clayton. I really appreciate that. And this has been a great joy. So let's stay in touch.
Before we go, is there anything that we haven't touched on that we could just look at before we go? Anything else that you want to make sure that folks know about your work?
Sure. Thank you. And for the reminder, here are a couple of things that could be useful to people listening to this. One is I do have a newsletter that I put out, and I publish in two places. One is on Substack under Neuromighty. People can search and find that on Substack. And the other is a LinkedIn newsletter on AI, neuroscience, and leadership. And I'm working on a book that should be out later this year. It'll be self-published, and it will give people a sense of the big picture that we've covered today in a nice encapsulated way. And I hope that will help people to think about how they want to work with some of these interesting changes that we've been discussing, and maybe make some connections to their own mindfulness practice in a way that would be helpful to them in their work.
Awesome. I will make sure that I'm personally paying attention to the upcoming book, because I will be one of the first people who wants to read it. I do read your newsletter, and I appreciate that. And I really appreciate our friendship and connection, and great gratitude for the time that you've given us. This gift has been wonderful. So thanks so much, Janine.
Likewise.
Hey, thanks for listening. I want to give a big shout out to John Gehring of Story Trust Media for his expert editing and wonderful production guidance. I also am deeply grateful for the ongoing support I receive from Meditation for Leadership and their sponsorship. So that's all for now. Until next time, this is Clayton Platt saying, watch for those moments of magic when mindfulness shows up in real time in your life.